Hello people, welcome back to another video, and in this video we will see how you can integrate custom authentication system in your Flutter application. And for this very tutorial there are two major repositories that you need to clone. First of all is this one, the sample authentication server, right? This is a very basic server that is built in TypeScript with mainly three APIs: one to sign up, login, and to show a protected route. Ensure that you have got Node.js installed on your system. All you have to do is go to this website, right, and install the latest version of Node.js and you'll be good to go, right? So just clone this code and you can follow these instructions out here. And then you need to clone this repository as well. This contains all the starter code to move along with this tutorial, but I urge you to build your own repository as well if you wish to. Right, let's get started. So there is nothing much to do here. All you have to do once you have cloned this code, all you have to do is npm I, and again you'll get npm once you install Node.js, and npm run dev. Okay, that will start your local server, and of course you are not supposed to deploy this anywhere, so you're fine with whatever you do with the server. Now copy whatever you see over here. This might be something different for you. This might be 1.10 or 3.1 or something like that for you, right? You can place it somewhere aside, and then inside your mobile app code you have to go to constants endpoints and replace this string with whatever it was there, right? Sweet. Then you can save it. Let's start the application. Once your application is up and running, of course you're going to see this dark screen over here. That's completely fine. You can just come out here in the app.dart and set home to something like login view, right? You can save this and give it a quick restart. Okay, that works for us. Sweet. So before we dive in, let us quickly understand some basic theory behind the authentication, right? So in this video, what we'll cover is we'll cover the JWT auth, that is the JSON Web Tokens. What happens is when your mobile application sends a login request to the server issues you a JWT token, and this has some time cliff. This can be around 1 hour or it can be 30 days, depending upon your use case and depending upon whatever you're building. And once you have this JWT token acquired, you can use this token to request the data that is hidden from any user that is not logged in. Okay, any kind of protected data that should not be shown to user that is not logged in, right? This can be some sort of social media application, or this can be your LinkedIn application, anything like that, right? And as far as the flow goes, so we store, once we are logged in, we store this token in something called shared preferences. Why? Because it persists even after when the app is killed. So when the app starts, we see if there is a token in the shared preferences. If there is a token, we just show the feed or the home of the application. If there's no token, we route the user to login or the sign up page, right? Sweet. Let's build this. In the existing repository, what you will see is we have a features folder where you will see an authentication folder. Within the view, you have a login view, a sign up view. Inside the feed folder, you have the feed view, right? So there are three major UI screens that are already present, and these are the ones that we are going to work around. So right off the bat, let's get the routing going on. So if you go to the utils folder, you can go to the router, and in here what we have done is we created a Go router, but need to wrap it with Riverpod. And of course, for the purpose of state management, we are using Riverpod for this tutorial. And of course, keep alive is going to true. And this is going to be part router g.dart. And again, if you're not familiar with Riverpod, just stick around, you'll get the hang of it. No big deal. This is nothing too big to handle, right? And you also need to mention part router g.dart for this to work. Sweet. Once we have that, let's quickly run our build script. Let's go to terminal and say dart run build, run our build, right? In case if you're wondering what script is this, let me copy this and paste it somewhere in right around here. So that every time you can run this command whenever you like to, whenever it is required, right? Okay, now we have the provider for our Go router, and to get access to this router, right? And let's discuss that as well since we are talking about routers. Okay, so we are going to have two main routers, right? For the pages where the user is not logged in, this one, there's going to be a login page and a sign up page, and for the case where the user is logged in, we are going to have the feed page, right? So we are going to mainly have two routers. This is the auth router, like so, and this is going to be your router. Yeah, that works. So I've got auth router and router, and this will decide what your user is going to see based on the token that we discussed out here. Okay. So now we have the provider built for our router, and we do have a Go router, and now what we'll do is we'll build a auth router as well. So we'll create a new file. We'll call it auth_router. Oh, all right. We already have an auth router as well. So we are going to do the same procedure here as well. Sweet. And then of course run the build command. Okay, so once that's done, what you can now do is you can come back here to your app. Instead of having a stateless widget, you can call it a consumer widget, right? Consumer widget is what you use when you're using Riverpod, and you have to make widget ref, right? After this, what you can do is you can have access to both your routers. So mainly I can say final router equals ref.watch router provider, or is it Go router provider? Yeah, it is Go router provider. And of course, this was the Go router provider that was generated once we put that build command into the terminal, right? Once we run the build command in the terminal. And then we need to have the auth router as well. Sweet. Now you have access to the auth router and the Go router. Right. Now in the material app, instead of passing, we'll say router, and of course we can say debug banner show so that this debug goes away from here. And we need to pass the router config, right? Let it be router for now, and we'll save this. Okay, so what we have to do here is we have to write some logic that will decide whether to show auth routes or logged in routes, or the regular routes, right? So as of now, we'll show the auth routes. So if I say the auth router here, it is going to show the login. Why? Because the auth router is configured such that the initial location is the login.route path. Okay. Now if you go to the login view, in here we have a button that says don't have an account, sign up. So once we click that, we need to go to the sign up page. So I'll say, okay, right here, we'll say context.go, and we'll say sign up view.route path. Okay. And now if we click on this, we go to the sign up page, and once we're on the sign up page, nothing happens. So here as well, we have to say context.go login view.route route path, just like so. And you need to import the go router as well. We save it, we restart the app. Okay, so we have the UI out of our way. We can go to the sign up page and we can go to the login page, right? If we go back, sweet. So we are not adding a lot of, we're not adding multiple views to the stack. Now let us understand one more concept here. Since we are trying to keep our code as clean as possible, we have a UI file, right? We have the auth login, or let's call it the login view just for clarity. Login view, right? So the login view will make requests to the auth controller, and this auth controller will deal with the auth provider or the auth, the auth repository, right? Okay, and the auth repository is responsible for making the API request to our backend, right? So I'll just say backend like so. Okay, so the auth repository makes request to the backend gives some response, right? And similarly, the auth controller asks the auth repository to make that request. Auth repository tells the auth controller what happened, and the login view is the one that triggers the whole flow. Okay, so since we have built the login view, let us build the auth controller. So we will go to the features, auth controller, and we'll create a new file here. Call it auth controller.dart. Right. And within this auth controller, since we are creating an auth controller, we also need an auth repository. So we'll go and create an auth repository. We'll create auth repository. Right. The auth controller will have access to auth repository like so. So you can say final auth repository, and we won't be passing it like so. Instead, we will be having required auth repository. Repository, and then we'll assign that to the auth repository. Okay, so what we just did is to ensure that if we go back to our drawing board out here, you see the login view never communicates to the auth repository, right? This is to maintain this cleanliness key. The auth controller is the only person who's going to talk to the auth repository. And that is why the object of auth repository should not be visible from the object of auth controller to the login view, right? And that's what we did here, right? Since this has an underscore, so this object will never be, nobody will be able to access this object from the object of auth controller, right? Okay, that's out of the way now. Within this, since this auth repository is responsible for making network requests to the backend, we need to also ensure that we have our network repository up and running. Okay, so this is our network repository and we are using Dio. You can also make use of HTTP. HTTP is also a very, very popular package, but we'll be sticking to Dio since this is the industry standard today, right? So we'll have access to Dio, we'll have access to the auth token, and we'll talk about auth token later on. We have two major methods. One of them is the post request and the other is the get request, right? Let us first implement these methods, and we can, and of course we'll be able to return the response whatever we get out here. So let's clear this out. Let's say final. There's some result, and then what we can do is await do.get, and we can pass in the path. Path is what we have in the URL, so we'll just pass in the URL like so. Sweet. And just to catch the errors, we will do a try catch like so, right? So if this result is of type response, okay, all right. In case if you're wondering what we just did over here is, let me pass in the message, say something went wrong. Okay, what we did here is, if this was a successful request, we'll return a response. If it was not a successful request, we'll return a failure, right? And that is what this future either means. So if you go to the definition of future either, it says it is of type either the failure or the object, where instead of object, it's response. For clarity, if I can rewrite this either failure or response. And again, since this since we have an asynchronous tag over here, this is of type future. Okay, just for clarity and just for simplicity, we have defined a type called future either, so that we do not have to write such a long declaration. Okay, so we'll just make use of this. Sweet. So this means if there was some response, we'll return the response. If there was something went wrong, we'll return a failure, right? Okay, similarly, we'll implement our post request as well. So we'll say final result, await do dot, this time it's going to be the post method. Again, what are post and get methods? No big deal. We'll just we'll talk about them as well in a minute. And we'll pass data as body. Okay, and eventually we can return the response if it was actually a response, or we can simply return a failure if anything goes wrong. So we'll return a failure. Sweet. So now we have implemented our network repository, and we will need a provider for this as well. So we will create a provider by saying final network, to be network repository equals do, right? And we can either pass do as like so, or we can create a provider for do as well. So if we go to the commons, we go to the providers folder and create a new file and call do provider, or just call do.dart, and we can say at Riverpod and we'll say do, and this has to be ref. Sweet. And we can import this. Ensure that the R is capital over here, and wherever we mark Riverpod, keep alive true, right? Okay, and that way we can get access to do. So we can say Riverpod keep alive true, and we can say ref dot watch do provider. Okay, we don't have the do provider as of now, but if we run the command And before we run the command, we need to ensure that we are having part network g.dart, and we put a part here as well. Sweet. And we can now run the command to generate our providers. Sweet. We can go back to the network and we can fix the import. Yeah, that's fine. We'll come back to the auth token as well, but as of now we'll pass it empty because we just need to get this to work somehow. Okay. Now let us implement our auth repository since we have our network request handler in place. This similarly will have access to the network repository. Network repository. Let us go back to the diagram. Right. So the auth repository makes the API calls using the network repository. So I'm going to add another repository in between, another block in between. This is the network repository, right? This is the centralized way of making request, and this repository can make request to not just our server but to any server that has RESTful APIs, right? Okay. This would give more clarity. And again, we'll do the same thing. The auth controller will never have access to the network repository, right? So this is the chain that we're going to follow. Okay. So let's make this import like so. And if you look at the constructor of the auth controller, we made a constructor like so, where this is a private member. Similarly, we'll create a constructor auth repository. Again, this dot network repository is same as as the one we do with the required, but with required we do like so. This won't work here. Right? Yeah. We pass this network repository in the constructor and then we assign the private member with that. Okay. Now once we have the network access to network repository, now we can implement our methods. We can use future of type either. Let's talk about the type later on. We'll need to have two methods, login and sign up. Right. So the login method would take in an email, required string email password, and the sign up would take email, password, and a name as well, required string name. Okay, so these are the inputs for these are the signature for these functions, right? Okay, and now what we'll do is we can ask the network repository to make the calls. Okay, before we proceed, let us look at our server once again. So this is our server, right? I would urge you to go to the packages out here and install something called as Thunder client, right? Yeah, there's the Thunder client. I've already installed, and we'll test if everything works fine. So we'll create a new request and we have to go to this very address /auth/login. This is going to be of type post, right? And what we'll do is in the body we will pass, okay, login won't work because we do not have a user over there. Let us do sign up first. So name can be what do we call, Dartbucket, email, and again this is the test server, so we can put an email whatever we like. So dart@bucket.com. Password can be something that we can remember. Okay, that's the simplest password I can remember. And let us hit the request. Okay, something's gone wrong. So currently it says "404 not found." Okay. GN. And now if we send this request, okay, it went through. And if we look at the response, what do we have? We have a user object and we have a token, right? So that we can save the user with the name and the email. And again, the password is hashed, so this is something we can ignore. And we get the token. This is what we actually need to make requests to our protected routes, right? So a server has some protected data that can be accessed once we have this token. Okay. All we have to do is we have to ensure that we request this very endpoint, and it has to be auth/signup at the end. Okay. Back to our mobile application code. So we have to make request to implement signup. You'll say network repository dot post request. Okay, URL is going to be interesting. If you go to the repository again, and if you are following the same the same GitHub repository, and you go to the endpoints file, you'll see that the endpoints are already configured for you. And if you wish to understand, all you have to look at the underscore base URL. The base URL points to this, so which means this is the value of underscore base URL, which means this becomes this, and then we have /auth/login, and similarly the value of this is /auth/signup, right? Okay, so this is something that you can definitely check around. We don't have to save that. And what we can do is we can say auth endpoints dot register. I guess it was register, right? Okay, the sign up maps to the one that says register. Fine. And we need to pass in the body. The body is simple as we passed in using the Thunder client in the following JSON format. So this can be a map that we can construct like so. We can say final body equals name to be name, email to be email, and password to be password, right? And finally we can pass in the body like so, right? Once we do that, we are going to get some result, final result. Remember, we are calling it result because we do not know whether if it is a response or is it a failure, right? To resolve this, what we do here is result dot fold. Okay, this will resolve in future, so this has to be an await, and for the wait to work, this has to be an asynchronous type. Sweet. Once we do that, we can now call the fold function, and on the left we have a failure, right? And on the right we have a response. Okay, so this function takes in two functions, right? Failure, one right here we can handle the failure, handle failure, right? And if there was no failure, if it was actually some response, we can handle the response, handle response. Sweet. So if something goes wrong, we'll talk about that later. But if we have a response, what we can do is we can we can take out the user and we can take out the token. But wait, we need a place to store them, right? We need a structure to keep this data within our application, right? One of the best ways is to create a model, right? So what we'll do is we'll go back to the model and we'll create a new file. We'll call user.dart, right? We'll create a class called user. Okay, and if you go to the response, we have a name, email, and ID, right? These are the three things that we care about. We do not have to store the password here because again, this will make no sense because this is a hashed password and there's no point in storing that password, right? So we'll have final ID, final string ID, final string email, and final string name. Okay, that's the information that we need, and we will create a constructor. Okay, I guess that's not how we create a constructor, right? So we have the constructor in our place, we have ID, email, and since this is coming as a JSON, we need a method to convert from JSON. So of course, factory user dot from JSON. This is going to be of type dynamic. Return user. Of course, you can make use of these suggestions, but something to note is the ID is of type underscore ID. So if we go back to our response, this was our response. The ID is on this underscore ID. So we'll use underscore ID. For name, we can use the key name because that maps correctly. No difference. And the last one being the email, right? Okay, so now we have our data class ready for the user, right? But this returns a complete object that has a user and an auth token. This can be a string, right? So what if we create another model that has a user and a token, and we can call such a model as auth. So we'll create a new file and call auth.dart class auth, right? This can store final user final string token. Sweet. Now we can create a constructor for auth as well. Require this .user, require this .token, and we can create a from JSON method as well, right? So what this method will do is we can pass in this whole data. It will go to the user key and then pass and then create a user object, and then it will go to the token and just have this token stored in the string like so. Okay, so this is ready. Let us go back to our repository. Where is it? Okay, the auth repository. So what we'll have is final data equals result. Okay, result response dot data. This is where we'll have the data, and what we can do is final auth equals auth dot from JSON, and simply pass in the data like so, because we have two major keys here, user and token. That's it. This should probably work. Okay, and which means this also needs a return type, and we are going to set it to future either of type auth, right? Because this can go wrong as well. So we will return, we have to say return here as well, because this is in continuation. Return, if everything goes right, return right auth, and we can simply return the failure. Return left failure. Okay. And fun fact, what we can also do here is, if something goes wrong and we're not able to parse this data, right, we can wrap this with try catch. Try catch, right? And we can always return a new kind of failure. Left failure, and we can pass in the message failed to parse response. Sweet. Okay, the sign up function looks good. Let's go to the endpoint. Okay, then we don't need to go to the endpoint. Let us go to the controller. Right now, what we can do is we can call in the sign up function. So this time this can be of type future void, because we are not returning anything from here. We'll say login, and we'll mark it asynchronous, and we will call auth repository dot login. And since we need email and password, we'll have to pass it like so. Okay, the login is not implemented yet, but no worries, we of course need that in future. We will call the sign up, and we need one more thing called the name. Required string name, right? And we can pass name like so. That's nice. So now we have the sign up function ready. Now what we can do is, within our sign up function, we can get access to result equals await, and this time result will not have response, this will have authentication or auth. So we can always say result dot hold, and this time of course one of them has a failure and the other has an auth, right? So failure, we can do something, we'll handle failure later on, but do something with the auth. Okay. Now remember, in our explainer we said once we have an object of auth, we will store it in the shared preferences. It's time to create that shared preferences so that we can store our authentication token or the user or whatever we get from the server. So this is the shared preferences. Okay, sweet. So we'll go back to our code, and we first go to the pubspec.yaml. I don't think we have shared preferences installed, so we can do it right now. Shared preferences, shared preference, I guess that's what it is. Okay, we'll save this and do a flutter pub get. Right now we do have access to shared preferences, and we need to create the shared preferences provider. So we'll create new folder, we'll call service shared preferences dart, and we'll create a new class called shared preferences or shared pref service. Okay, this is a service, right? And in here we are going to have few keys. So static const string auth key, and of course I'll tell you why do we need this in a moment, right? Now what we'll have is we can have a function, say save or future void save auth, and we need to pass in auth. Okay, so shared preferences is something that we can use to store strings, right? But this auth is an object, right? So we'll go to the auth and we'll create another method called to.json map, of course, map string dynamic. Okay, that's going to be pretty straightforward. A user and a token, and we do not have to.json on user, so we need to create that now. We'll go to the user and we'll say to.json, and that is going to be of type map string dynamic, and we'll say to JSON. Right? We have an ID like so. We need to ensure that we save it in the same way, underscore ID. That maps to ID, and name maps to name, email maps to email. That's fine. You can close that, and in here what we can do is we can say final prefs. We need to get the object of shared preferences. Await shared preferences dot get instance, and we need to mark this asynchronous. Okay, and prefs dot set string key has to be the auth key, and value will be auth dot to JSON, right? And this JSON can be converted to string. So using a built-in function, JSON encode, we pass in the auth JSON, and we can convert this to string. Now, since we are saving auth, we need a function to retrieve the auth as well, right? And this can be null, right? Because assume the very first time this app is restarted, there is no auth as well, so which means this can be null. That's why we are assuming this is a nullable auth. Okay, and again we need object, we need get access to prefs, and prefs dot get string is going to be the auth key, right? If and final auth data, right? If auth data is null, we'll simply return null. If not, we'll simply try to parse it. First we'll JSON decode, and then once we have that map string dynamic, we'll pass that to auth.from JSON, right? So the shared pref service looks good. What we can now do is we can create a class, or we can create a provider. We can create shared pref service, and to make it a provider, we need to write ref and return that and mark it as with Riverpod. Keep alive true, that's fine. And finally, we need the part thing. Okay, part shared preference underscore g dot dart. Okay, and we can run our beloved command out here. Sweet. Right, that's done. We can close it. Go back to our auth controller. And now what we can do is we need to get access to our shared preferences as well. So again, now we have a provider to this. What we will do here is we'll say final ref, and we'll talk about ref later on. Again, we'll see how do we get access to ref later on. But right now we need to get access to ref somehow within this class. Okay, now we have access to ref. What we can do is we can say ref dot read shared ref service provider speed, and then we can call save auth and pass in the object of auth. That is one. And now we need something that this application, the whole application listens to, that can reset the whole application whenever there is a change in the authentication or whenever a user authenticates, right? What I mean to say is, if I go back to the drawing board, right, we need something, some entity or some provider that the whole application listens to, something like an auth provider, right? This auth provider and this whole application, everybody else is consistently listening. Or let us write it over here. Okay, we have an auth provider, right? So this is consistently being listened by the material app. Whenever this changes, the material app can decide whether to show the auth routes or to show the regular routes, right? So we need to create this auth provider that is listenable. So what we can do is we can go back to our commons providers and we can create a new file. We'll say auth.dart, right? And we can call it what do we say, auth ref, and this can return null because this is nullable. In the beginning this can be null as well. Okay, and we can say part auth.g.dart and have the Riverpod decorator. Okay, in the beginning of course auth will be null. So what now we can do is we can also, let's run our Riverpod generator again, so that we have the auth provider. You can say ref dot read auth provider. You can say update, okay, dot okay, we will not have access to notifier because this does not have a state. So we'll go back to the auth dot, yeah, we need to have a state here. So let's not call it auth like so. Let's call it current auth. So we need to have a new class current auth extends something like dollar current auth, and this is the new standard for writing new Riverpod providers. Override auth build, right? And this will return null in the beginning, right? And we need to create a method that says void set auth, that will take in the object of auth, and we'll set the auth like so. Sweet. Okay, undefined name state does not exist. That's fine. This will exist once we run our generator once again. And again, this can be nullable, so that whenever we log out, we'll set this to null, and we will go back to the login pages once again. Again, this will all make sense once we have this built. Sweet. Now what we can do is we can read the current auth provider. Now we can access the notifier, and now we can say set auth and pass in the auth. Okay. As we discussed, auth provider will be something that the material app will listen and decide whether which routes to be shown, either to show the auth router or the regular one, right? So we'll minimize this. We'll go back to our auth. We'll go back to our app.dart, and since this is a consumer widget, this can now listen to auth. So final auth equals ref.watch current auth provider. We will import this, and now based on this we'll decide whether to show. So if auth is null, which means there are no user, simply show the auth router, ask the user to log in either create a new account, or if there is something in the auth, we already have some authentication, then we'll show the regular router, right? And if we save this, nothing happens because this would be null as of now. Okay, and we don't need this import, I believe. Sweet. Now what we can do is, if we create an account, or all we are left to do is to wire this sign up with the controller, right? So what we'll do is we'll go to the features, auth controller. We have access to sign up now, right? Now the auth controller must extend something called as auth controller, because we need a loading state as well, whether or not something is loading or not. So we'll have at override not void, we'll have boolean build and return false, and this is not required to be asynchronous. And also this will be having part auth controller dot g dot that, of course, and we can run our build runner. Okay, I believe we did not get a controller for this. Okay, something does not feel right. Okay, we did not mark it as Riverpod keep alive true. Yeah, now once we run that, we would now have an auth controller. I guess it didn't work this time as well. Right. Okay. This won't work simply because we cannot create a provider like so. So what we'll eventually have to do is we'll say auth controller, or we'll say auth controller ref, and then we'll pass auth controller like so. Now we will have the access to the auth repository. Okay, I click this. We need to set up the auth repository as well, right? So we'll say final, not final, we'll say auth repository ref to have auth repository, and that will eventually watch the network repository. And now we can mark this with Riverpod, keep alive true, part auth repository g.dart. Sweet. And we will eventually have access to auth repository. So let's try to build this now. Okay, I guess that went through. Okay, we did not mark this with Riverpod. Alright, looks like this went through, and now I believe we have everything in place. Alright, I guess it still shows some error. Alright, so right, we're in Riverpod 3.0. So in newer versions of Riverpod, I believe we cannot have this. So instead of taking access to this repository like so, we'll since we already have access to ref, what we can here do is not have repository passed in like so. We can remove this, right? And we can always say final auth repository equals ref dot read auth repository provider, right? And similarly, we can do something similar here as well. Sweet, that should fix the bug. And let's say Riverpod keep alive true, and let us try to rebuild this. I guess this time it went through and it worked. Nope, something went wrong. Okay guys, looks like in this version, in the newer versions of Riverpod, we do not have to pass ref like so. We will have access to ref. So I don't think this constructor is required anymore. We can simply have access to ref without the underscore, which means if we run this now, yep, this went through and now we are good to go. Sweet, that was painful, but no worries, we went through that. Let us now go to the UI where we have create account. We go to the auth, views, sign up view, and this is where we implement the sign up button. So we have a sign up button over here. We have name, email, and password. All we have to do is ref.read, but we don't have access to ref straight away. This button needs to be inside a builder. Let's get a builder. Right, and rename this builder to be consumer. Right, so we have context, ref, and child. Now what we can do is we can call, we can watch ref dot watch auth controller provider. Right, now this will tell us whether or not something is going on, whether or not it's loading. So we can say loading. So if it is loading, if loading, return sized box of some height, say let it be, instead of this, let's say center child circle progress indicator, in case if it is loading. If it is not loading, we will be showing this button. And to trigger this, what we have to do is, once on inside the on pressed, we'll say ref dot read auth controller provider dot notifier dot sign up, and this will automatically pass the email, password, and name. Right, okay, let us restart the whole app. In fact, since we have not restarted since we installed shared preferences, let us kill the app and run it once again. Sweet. Now let us go to the sign up page, and we can bring up our server as well, just so that we can see if anything is going on here. Right, and we'll minimize this, we'll fill in the details, we'll say Dartbucket, and we'll say some password. We'll click sign up. Okay, something does not feel right. Let us go to our server. Okay, the request eventually came in. We had dart@gmail.com 123456789. This is essentially hacking. We should never log these details, but this is our test server, so we can live with that. I guess something went wrong. Let's see. Maybe we landed on a protected page. So let us call the feed. Let us give it some app bar. protected page, right? Okay, yeah. So I guess the sign up was successful and we landed on the product protected page. All right, but what would happen if we restart the app? Yeah, we are back to the login page. The details were saved, but we haven't written the logic that is supposed to fetch those details, right? To do so, what we'll do is we will create a new controller, and we will call it the init controller, right? So the init controller will do something for us. We will have class init controller extends, or this can be a regular class itself. We don't need a ref for that. So we'll say this final ref, and we can say init controller required ref. We'll import this. And we'll say ref, that's fine. And we will again future void init, right? So the sole responsibility of this is to read the auth from this final auth equals await ref dot read auth controller, not the auth controller, but the shared service provider, and say get auth, right? So we have the access to the auth that is stored in the shared preferences, and we need to set it to the current auth provider, right? If it is not null, only then we'll set it, and if it is null, then there is no point in setting the auth controller provider, right? So let's refresh this, and we'll create the provider for this real quick. At Riverpod, keep alive true, and we can say init controller, init controller. That's all we need. And we will have the part thing as well. Sweet. Let's build this. Right, and yes. So the app.dat, or the application itself, okay, this should be an application that is an extra. Let us remove that. Okay, let us save this, and we need to ensure that we are calling the initiator in this class, and this cannot be done using a stateless widget. So we need to go back to a stateful widget. We don't need all this. Right. So how do we do that? Can we convert this to a stateful widget? Don't think so. Let's do this. Let's convert this to stateless widget again. Stateless widget. We'll remove this. We will convert to. Okay, we don't see that option. Okay, there we go. We can now convert to stateful widget, and now we can say this is a consumer stateful widget, so that we have access to ref everywhere. And now we get access to init state as well, so that we can do widget binding instance dot add post frame callback, and inside this callback is where we will call our init provider. Say ref dot read init controller provider dot init, right? So whenever the application will start, this will initiate the value of auth so that we can restart the app. And since we were signed in, this is what we get, the protected page. Okay, now the question would be, how do we sign out, right? Because if you go back to our whiteboard, if you if you're on this page, we have to sign out, right? We need to ensure that this provider also gets reset and the shared preferences are also deleted. So we need to create those functions as well. So we'll go to the shared preferences. And we'd say future void clear auth, right? And similarly, we'll get access to the shared preferences instance, and we can say prefs dot remove key, and that will be the auth key, right? And this has to be asynchronous as well, right? We have a function to clear auth, and now what we can do is we can go back to our authentication controller, auth controller, and we can implement a method to sign out as well. So future void sign out, or sign out also works, right? So when we are signing up, or whenever we are logging in, we are setting the auth value to our shared preferences, and we are setting this to our current auth provider as well, right? Whenever we sign out, we need to again update both of these. So we can say save auth to be null. Of course, we are not saving anything. We are clearing the auth. So we'll say clear auth. So the next time when the application starts, it does not pick up the same user, and we set auth to null. Okay, or a clear method can be void clear auth, and this will say state equals null, right? And then we can call clear auth as well, so that we have more clarity of what we are doing, right? This will clear that value, and once this value is cleared, since it is being listened by the material app, it will automatically show us the login page or the sign up page, right? So let's try to see if this works. Let us go to the protected page. Where is it? It is in feed, right? And we can have some body out here. Right, and this is going to have some text, say logout, like so, and we'll make this a consumer widget, so that we have access to widget ref, and now we can read the auth controller provider and call sign out on this, we'll just restart the whole app. And if we say logout, see, we are back on the login page. Similarly, we'll also implement our login function as well, right? So all we have to do is, you can again take this as an exercise for yourself, or you can follow along to implement the login function as well, right? So we are going to get similar kind of results. We are going to perform similar kind of things on the login function. So we are going to say result final result equals wait, this one. And when we log in, we implement similar kind of function. So we can copy all this and we can paste. The only thing, we do not have anything called name. We'll remove name from here, and of course this has to be an asynchronous function as well, right? And this will be of type future void. Okay, not void, this will be of type auth as well, and it's future either because we have failure. So we have an email, we have a password, and instead of the register, we will go to the login route. That's all we need to do. And within the auth controller, we have access to auth. Okay. Okay, this says this is auth nullable. And this won't be null. We are sure for that. Okay. And what else? Yeah, we need to wire this up to the UI. So we'll go to the view, we'll go to the login view. We can simply copy these elements. We have a loading indicator. So let's copy the whole consumer itself. Copy the consumer, go to the login page, and instead of showing this elevated button, we'll show this consumer. We'll have all the imports in place. Yeah, we don't have a name controller. We don't need it anyway. Instead of sign up, we have login. Don't require name as well. And this should say login. Sweet. I believe this should work. Let's give it a hot restart and let us retrieve what was our email and password. Email was this. Let's copy this, and again this is essentially hacking. We should never do this. And we'll paste the password as well. Yeah, I'll paste and say login, and voila. Alright people, there is now one last portion left where you're supposed to hit a protected route. So if I go to the server and if I go to the Thunder client, we have a protected route as well. So yeah, this is the one, /protected/data. And if I send a request without any authentication, it should probably not work. Okay, I'll have to change this as well because I restarted the server. How do I cancel this? Okay, I can cancel like so. I send this request like so. Okay, we were having some sort of authentication in here. Okay, this is an older token, but what we're supposed to do here is whenever we get a token, excuse me, whenever, okay, I'll have to hit the request once again. And I have to update this as well. Right, if I send request now, and whenever we get an auth token over here, we have to copy this and we have to paste it somewhere here, right? So that we're able to ensure that our beer token gets through. If I send this request now, of course this will work. Okay, so how do we integrate this within our app? So we did create something called as an auth provider, right? Now this auth provider has the complete auth object, and on this auth object we have access to let me see, where's the object? Yeah, there's the auth class, and we have access to both the user and the token. So what we can do is we can pass in this token to our network repository out here, right? As of now the token is empty, right? So what we'll do is we will pass the token, or let it be empty for now. Let us see what happens if we try to hit the protected route, right? So we'll just quickly create those controllers out here inside of feed controller. We'll create a new file, call feed controller.dart, and in repository again we have endpoints and we have the endpoint setup. We'll create a new file, feed repository.dart, right? And let's say class feed controller class feed repository, and the feed repository will again have access to the network repository that we will not be writing, we'll copy. Yeah, and we'll copy this and we'll mark it Riverpod, keep alive true, and we'll say part feed repository g.dart, like so. Okay, let us create the controller. Hold on. And since this is the feed, and what kind of feed do we get? So we get a backend response, we get the post. Okay, let us call it a card, and a feed card has a name and a post, right? So what we'll do is we'll create an object, we'll create a class for that, and we'll say new file, we'll say post.dart class post final string name, final string the post itself, right? And we can create the constructor and the factory post from JSON. We have a name, we have post, that's fine, right? The repository is supposed to get all the posts, so we'll create a method future either of type list of type post, right? And say get post, right? And we'll say final result equals network repository dot get request feed endpoints dot feed okay, dot data, we can live with that. Let's say await, so that we have something in the result, and finally we'll fold the result. We have a failure and we have a response, right? In case we have a failure, we'll just simply return failure, right? Import this, and in case we have a response, we'll try to parse it. Try final data equals response dot data, and we have everything on. Okay, so there's a list, and this list can be accessed using the key data, right? So that's what we'll do. We'll copy this final post list JSON as data. I have to call the key data over there, like so. And now we can say final posts equals to post list JSON, and let's call it something of type list, so that we get all the map functions. Map to JSON, post dot from JSON, pass JSON, and dot to list, and then we can return the posts, and if something goes wrong, we'll return the failure. Sweet, we have the repository ready. Now let us look at our controller. Extends feed controller. We have an override, and since we know that this is going to have some loading state, we can create a state for the feed as well. So we'll create a new folder, we'll call it state, and we will call it feed state dot dart feed state. So we have final boolean loading and a list of posts, right? So we'll create a constructor, and we can create a copy with method. Feed state copy with, and this can have nullable loading and nullable posts. Return post. Okay, we'll return feed state. So if there is no loading, we'll just say this dot loading, because we don't want to change the value. And if posts are null, we'll just keep whatever the initial posts were, right? That's nice. And we can also say feed state dot initial, right? Feed state build and return feed state dot initial, right? Because there's a state that we need to keep track of. Okay, and once we have this, let us build our controller, the controller provider. Keep alive set to true. Okay, we'll add the part, and we will run the build runner. Okay, something isn't right. Okay, repository controller cannot be built that way. So what we'll do is we'd say feed repository, and we'll pass in the network repository provider. Instead of ref, this is going to have ref like so. If we run the controller, we run the builder once again. So what we did is we are watching the network repository provider that will give us the object of network repository that will pass in the feed repository like so, as required by the constructor. Right. That looks sweet. Let's close this. Let's go to the feed controller. Right. Now we can call in the method to say future void get feed async. We'll see if if it is already doing something. So we'll check state dot loading. If it is already doing something, we don't want to proceed. If it's not doing something, then we'll say that hey, we are loading until we do the API call loading, say true. And now finally we can ask the, let's first get access to the feed repository like so, ref dot read feed repository provider, and finally we can do final result equals await feed dot get post result dot fold. We have a failure, some sort of failure, and we have a feed, or we have a list of posts. So if we have a list of posts, we'll set our state to be loading false and set the list of posts to the new list of posts to the current state. And if something went wrong, we simply say state dot copy with, and of course you can ask the user to pass. You can pass a function over here, say on error from the UI, and then show a snack bar from there. But as of now, just to keep the simplicity, we are keeping it like so. All right, this feels fine. Now what we'll do is we will go back to our protected route, or we'll go back to our feed page, right, and convert this to a stateful widget using a simple hack, using the cheap hack. How do we do that? Yeah, convert to stateful widget. Now get back to consumer stateful widget. Okay, we have consumer stateful widget. Now what we can do is we can load the feed list here. So what we'll do is in the init state, we have widget binding instance dot add post frame callback. How do we do that? Yes, there we go. This is just to show that when the widget is complete building, only and only after that we call something like feed controller provider dot notifier get feed, right? And in here what we can do is we can move this elevated button to the actions, right? And instead of showing body, we can show a consumer widget. A consumer is going to have context ref child, and this will watch for this provider. Final state is equal to, no, this is not required, this isn't required. So we have state boolean, okay, not the auth provider. Yeah, that's my bad. This should be the feed controller provider, so that we have the feed state here. So if state.loading, if it is loading, we'll simply show a circular indicator. We'll return center circle progress indicator, right? If the feed is not loading and if posts are empty, then we'll say no posts yet. And if we have some data, we'll show our final, we'll say list view dot builder. Item count state dot post dot length. Item builder. We'll have index, and we're gonna have context. Okay, context comes first, index comes second, right? Final post equals state dot posts at index, right? So we have a single post here, which we can render by saying return list title post dot name subtitle. Okay, what is it? This has to be a widget. So what we can do is we will wrap this inside of a text, and we'll wrap this inside of a text as well. Post dot post, right? Okay, that's nice. Let us try to restart our app. Okay, this is not logged in. So what we'll do is we'll create a new account because we reset our server, and that is the reason we lost everything. This does not have an actual database, so we'll have to do that again. Let's call it villain at gmail.com. I'll sign up. Okay, something didn't work. Let us see. Let's go to the debug console. Okay, this was called. Let us see if we have a request on our server. I don't see villain anywhere. Okay, if this happens to you, what you can do is you can always copy the new address from here, and you can go back to your code in the constants and points and update this. I'll save it. I'll restart the app, and if I now try to do this, villain at gmail.com, and then sign up. Okay, it went through, but you see, we see the circular loading indicator because it does not have access. It keeps loading because we did not send our auth token, and that is the reason this request did not resolve. So if we come out here, the network, right, the auth token is empty, and even if it had some value, we are still not passing it anywhere in the request, right? So how do we pass this auth token, right? So how do we pass this auth token, right? Okay, so what do we have to do here is we come down here, we add another property called options. Inside of options, we have headers, and we'll pass an authorization header, right? Bearer, and then finally we can have auth token, right? That's how we pass in the auth token when making a request, right? Now, since we want the network repository to reset to the new value of authentication, we need to watch something. So what do we watch? We watch ref.watch current auth provider and get the token from it, right? Now the thing is, this provider tends to send us, this can also send us a nullable value, right? So if it is null, we do this, else we get the token. Okay, if it is null, we pass in an empty string. If it is not, we get the token from it, right? We save this, we restart the app. Okay, it's still loading, it's continuously spinning. Let us see what went wrong. Probably it is getting the data, but it is not somehow resetting in the UI. So we'll go to the view. Okay, we are reading this. Let us set to watch. Let's restart the app. Okay, there you go. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how you implement custom APIs into your Flutter application for, of course, authentication. That's all for this video. Thanks a lot. Leave a like, leave a comment, and do subscribe. This is Dartbucket signing out.